After our family reunion, I checked my account. It was drained. My brother-in-law snorted. We needed it more. When I opened my banking app after our family reunion, my heart stopped. Balance 0.0 gone. Every dollar I'd saved for years vanished overnight. I stumbled back, staring at the screen in disbelief, my pulse roaring in my ears. Across the room, my brother-in-law, Zephyr, leaned on the kitchen counter, smirking. "Relax, Ruby," he said, swirling his drink. "We needed it more than you." That was the moment something inside me went cold. He didn't know it yet, but he'd just stolen from the wrong person. I'm Ruby Thompson. I'm 33 years old. And for most of my adult life, I have been the responsible one, the reliable one, the one who shows up with a casserole for the potluck and a check for the fundraiser. The one who remembers birthdays and sends thank you cards. I own a small graphic design studio in Seattle, a business I built from nothing. I started it in the corner of my tiny studio apartment, hunched over a second-hand laptop while the city slept. Back then, my life ran on cheap coffee and the flimsy hope that hard work would eventually pay off. I worked double shifts at a bookstore, the smell of paper and ink clinging to my clothes, and came home to freelance for clients who paid late, if they paid at all. My diet consisted of instant noodles, toast, and the sheer force of my own ambition. There was, clear's throat, no safety net, no trust fund waiting for me, no family money to fall back on. There was just me. Before I tell you how everything flipped, like and subscribe. Drop a comment. Where are you watching from? My sister Bella is 2 years younger than me. She is beautiful, charming, and has a way of making you feel like the most important person in the world, right up until she needs something from you. Then that warmth becomes a tool. We lost our parents in a car accident when I was 19 and she was 17. The world tilted on its axis that day, and it never quite straightened out. I became an adult overnight, not just for myself, but for her, too. I dropped out of my second year of college to work full-time so we could keep our small rental house. I managed the funeral arrangements, the bills, the crushing weight of a grief that felt too big for my shoulders. Bella just grieved. She drifted through those first few years in a haze of sorrow, leaning on me for everything. I didn't mind. She was my sister. It was my job to hold us together. But the pattern that started then never really stopped. I was the anchor. She was the kite. Beautiful and free, but always tethered to my practicality, my stability, my money. A few years later, she met Zephyr Mitchell. He walked into her life with a confident swagger, a blindingly white smile, and the faint expensive scent of cologne that seemed to suggest he was always on his way to a more important place. He was a smooth talker, the kind of man who could sell you on a dream and make you forget to ask about the price. He worked in finance, a vague term that seemed to involve a lot of important-sounding phone calls and very few tangible results. I disliked him from the moment I met him. He had a way of looking at me, a dismissive little smirk that said he'd sized me up and found me lacking. He saw my quiet nature and my sensible shoes and labeled me boring. To him, and by extension to Bella, I became the practical one. It wasn't a compliment. It was a box. Ruby is the practical one, so she won't mind watching the dog. Ruby is the practical one, so she'll understand why we can't pay her back this month. Ruby is the practical one, she doesn't need much to be happy. They saw my simple, focused life not as a choice, but as a limitation. They mistook my discipline for a lack of desire. The truth was, I had learned a hard lesson very early. No one was coming to save me. If I wanted a life of security, of peace, I would have to build it myself. Brick by painstaking brick. So that's what I did. While Bella and Zephyr were taking weekend trips to wine country and buying new cars they couldn't afford, I was saving. I was investing in my business, upgrading my equipment, and slowly, carefully building a future. My studio, Rubyful Designs, started to gain traction. I developed a reputation for being clean, creative, and ridiculously reliable. The late-paying clients were replaced by corporate accounts. The instant noodles were replaced by actual groceries. I was finally breathing. A full deep breath of financial security that I had earned all on my own. Through it all, I was still Bella's safety net. When she maxed out her credit cards on a shopping spree, I paid them off to keep the collectors from calling. She promised to pay me back. When she and Eric decided to move to a nicer apartment with a rent they couldn't afford, I co-signed the lease and covered their security deposit. She promised to pay me back when they wanted to buy their first house. They were short on the down payment. I lent them $20,000 from my business savings, a sum that made my stomach clench with anxiety. "We'll pay you back, Ruby. I swear," Bella had said, her eyes welling with tears of gratitude. "As soon as Derek's commission check comes in, this is our dream." I wanted to believe her. I loved my sister and I wanted her to be happy, but the commission check never seemed to come. Or if it did, there was always something else. Some other pressing need. A new couch, a vacation to Hawaii, a high-end grill for the backyard. My $20,000 was absorbed into their lifestyle. Another gift from the practical one who probably didn't need it anyway. I stopped asking about it. It was easier than hearing the excuses, easier than seeing the flash of annoyance in Derek's eyes. It was easier than admitting to myself that my sister, the only real family I had left, saw me not as a person, but as a resource, a bank, an emergency fund with a heartbeat. Still, I kept showing up. I went to their house for holidays, bringing the most expensive bottle of wine and the biggest dessert. I attended their baby showers, buying lavish gifts from their registry. I hosted their anniversary dinners at my favorite restaurant, and I always picked up the tab. I did it because I was clinging to a fragile idea of family. I was chasing the memory of what we were before our parents died. Two sisters against the world. I kept telling myself that one day the scales would balance. One day my loyalty and my love would be seen and it would be returned. I believed foolishly that family was an investment that would eventually pay dividends. I just didn't realize I was the only one paying in. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning. Its subject line written in a bubbly, cheerful font. "You're invited. A Thompson family reunion." It was from my Aunt Jane, my mother's older sister. She was the family matriarch, a woman who organized people and events with the same brisk efficiency she used to run her successful catering business. She had rented a sprawling mountain lodge for a long weekend and was summoning the entire clan, cousins I hadn't seen in a decade, great-aunts I barely knew, and all the assorted spouses and children in between. My first instinct was to delete it. I was busy. I had a major project deadline for a new client, and the thought of spending 3 days making forced small talk was exhausting. These gatherings always felt like a performance. Everyone would ask about my business, and I'd give them the polite, curated version of my life. "It's going well. Thank you." "Yes. Keeping very busy." They didn't want to hear about the stress, the sleepless nights, the constant pressure of being solely responsible for your own success. They wanted the highlight reel and I didn't have the energy to perform. Besides, Bella and Zephyr would be there. Being around them as a couple had become increasingly difficult. Derek's casual arrogance had curdled into a constant low-grade condescension, and Bella orbited him like a nervous moon, quick to laugh at his bad jokes and defend his questionable choices. In their presence, I felt myself shrink. I became quiet, watchful, the boring older sister all over again. I typed out a polite refusal. "Dear Aunt Jane, thank you so much for the invitation. It sounds wonderful, but unfortunately, I have a work commitment that weekend that I just can't get out of. I'll be thinking of you all." My finger hovered over the send button. But before I could click it, my phone rang. It was Bella. Her name flashed on the screen and I felt a familiar mix of love and resignation. "Did you get Aunt Jane's email?" she asked, her voice bright and breathless. "I just saw it," I said, my tone carefully neutral. "Isn't it amazing? A weekend at a lodge in the mountains. We have to go. You have to come, Ruby." "I don't know, Bella. I've got that big rebranding project for the tech firm. The deadline is tight." A heavy sigh came through the phone. It was a practiced sound filled with just the right amount of disappointment. "Please, Ruby, you never come to these things. You haven't seen half these people since Grandma's funeral. It would mean so much to everyone." To me, there it was. The gentle emotional pressure she knew I couldn't resist. She was framing my absence not as a choice about my own comfort or needs, but as a rejection of her, of the family. She was making it my responsibility to make her feel good about the event. It's just a lot, I said, already feeling my resolve crumble. It'll be fun, she insisted. We can go for hikes, sit by the fire, drink wine. It will be a break for you. You work too hard. This was another one of their favorite lines. They framed my work ethic as a character flaw, something to be pied, rather than the very thing that had funded their down payment. Okay, I said, the word tasting like defeat. Okay, I'll come. Oh, wonderful. The joy in her voice was immediate and genuine. She had gotten what she wanted. I can't wait to tell Zephyr. He'll be thrilled. I doubted that, but I kept the thought to myself. I shouldn't have gone. The moment I pulled up the long gravel driveway to the lodge, I knew I'd made a mistake. The place was breathtaking. A massive log and stone structure nestled among towering pine trees. Smoke curled from a stone chimney and warm light spilled from the huge picture windows. It looked like something from a postcard. A perfect image of cozy family togetherness. But as I stepped out of my car, a wave of loneliness washed over me. I felt like an intruder, an observer about to watch a play I wasn't really a part of. Inside, the great room was filled with the sounds of laughter and overlapping conversations. A fire roared in a hearth big enough to stand in. Long rustic dining tables were already being set with plates and silverware, and the air smelled of roasting chicken and wood smoke. Cousins hugged. Children shrieked and chased each other across the polished wood floors. And at the center of it all, Eric was holding court. He was leaning against a massive wooden bar, a glass of whiskey in his hand, telling some grand story to a captivated audience of my uncles. He was in his element, the charming, successful man of the world. He was bragging, I realized as I got closer, about a new business deal. It's a game share, he was saying, his voice loud and confident. A tech startup with a revolutionary new software. We're getting in on the ground floor this time next year. Bella and I will be looking at houses in the Bahamas. My uncles nodded, impressed. No one asked for specifics. No one questioned the logistics. Eric sold the sizzle, and people were always happy to buy it without asking about the steak. He saw me and his grin widened. He excused himself from the group and sauntered over, giving me a quick one-armed hug that felt more like a gesture of ownership than affection. Ruby, you made it. We were starting to think you'd chained yourself to your desk for the weekend. Hello, Zephyr, I said, forcing a smile. He winked as I walked past him to pour myself a cup of coffee from a large urn. Hey, Miss Moneybags, he teased, his voice low enough that only I could hear. Bella told me, your studio is killing it. Landing all the big fish. The nickname made my skin crawl. He'd started calling me that a few months ago, always with a joking tone that didn't quite mask the resentment beneath it. My success was a joke to him, an anomaly. I'm doing fine, I said curtly, adding cream to my coffee. He leaned against the counter, his grin turning into that slick, predatory smile that always felt like a warning. Good to know, he said slowly, taking a sip of his whiskey. Good to know who to hit up when times get tight. I managed a short, awkward laugh, the sound getting lost in the noise of the room. I told myself he was joking. It was just Derek's way. Crass and inappropriate, but ultimately harmless. I should have known better. I should have recognized the look in his eyes for what it was. He wasn't joking. He was shopping, and I was the only thing for sale. The rest of the day passed in a blur of forced smiles and stilted conversations. I answered the same questions over and over. No, I wasn't seeing anyone. Yes, the business was my baby. No, I didn't have much time for hobbies. With each answer, I felt the box they had put me in getting smaller and tighter. I was Ruby, the workaholic spinster. It was a simple, easy narrative that required no further thought from them. It allowed them to pity me a little, which made them feel better about their own chaotic, debt-ridden lives. Dinner was a loud, chaotic affair. We all sat at two long tables pushed together, passing platters of food, family style. I ended up seated between a great-aunt who couldn't hear and my 13-year-old cousin who was absorbed in his phone. Across the table, Bella and Derek were the perfect couple, laughing and holding hands. Zephyr kept refilling everyone's wine glasses, playing the part of the generous host, even though he hadn't paid for a thing. He caught my eye once and raised his glass in a toast. I just looked down at my plate. After the meal, people started to migrate toward the massive stone fireplace. Someone brought out a guitar and a clumsy off-key sing-along began. The wine was flowing freely and the volume in the room was rising. I felt a headache starting to form behind my eyes. I needed to escape. I remembered that my cousin Sarah, who was trying to launch her own floral business, had asked to see my portfolio. It was the perfect excuse. I'm just going to run upstairs and grab my laptop. I told Aunt Jane. Sarah wanted to see some of the branding work I've done. She patted my arm. Don't you go working up there now. This is a vacation. I won't, I promised. I made my way through the crowd and up the wide, creaking wooden staircase. The hallway upstairs was quiet and dimly lit, a welcome relief from the noise below. My room was at the very end of the hall. I'd left the door shut. I was sure of it. But as I approached, I saw it was slightly ajar, a thin sliver of light spilling out from the lamp I'd left on by the bed. My heart gave a little skip. I pushed the door open. Everything looked normal at first glance. My suitcase was in the corner. My coat was slung over a chair. But my laptop, which I had carefully zipped into its padded sleeve and placed inside my overnight bag, was sitting on the center of the bed open. The screen was dark, but I could tell it was in sleep mode. I walked over and placed my hand on the lid. It was still warm. A chill went through me that had nothing to do with the drafty old lodge. Who had been in my room? Who had used my computer? I looked around. Nothing else seemed to be disturbed. My wallet was still in my purse on the nightstand. My keys were there. It didn't feel like a robbery. Then I caught it. A faint familiar scent hanging in the air. The sharp spicy smell of Zephyr's cologne. My mind started racing, trying to find a logical explanation. Maybe he needed a charger. Maybe he wanted to put on some music for the kids in another room. But why wouldn't he have asked me? Why would he go into my bag into my room without permission? It felt like a violation. A quiet crossing of a boundary I hadn't even known needed to be defended. I tried to brush it off. I told myself I was overreacting. It was just Zephyr being thoughtless as usual. I closed the laptop, put it back in its sleeve, and zipped it securely in my bag. The moment had passed. I took a few deep breaths, trying to shake the uneasy feeling that had settled in my gut. Later that night, long after the sing-along had ended and the house had fallen into a heavy wine-fueled silence, I was in bed scrolling through emails on my phone. An alert popped up on my screen from my banking app. It was one I'd never seen before. New login detected from a recognized device in a new location. My breath caught in my throat. I stared at the screen, my blood turning to ice. The location was pinned precisely to where I was, the mountain lodge, my device, my laptop. My mind flashed back to the warm computer on my bed, the scent of Derek's cologne. No, it couldn't be. I was being paranoid. Maybe it was a glitch. But then another notification came through and another. They were push alerts one after another. A rapid-fire assault on the quiet of the room. Dear initiated a transfer of $40,000 from your business. Savings account has been scheduled. Transfer initiated. A transfer of $50,000 from your Premier. Checking account has been scheduled. Transfer initiated. A transfer of $30,000 from your personal investment. Account has been scheduled. It was a nightmare. Unfolding in real time in sterile, emotionless text on my phone screen. I scrambled to open the app. My fingers fumbling on the passcode. My heart hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it would break. The app was slow to load. The little spinning wheel, a symbol of my own powerlessness. I was watching years of my life, years of sacrifice and 16-hour days being siphoned away in a matter of seconds. I tried to cancel the transfers, but they were already processing. I called the bank's 24-hour fraud line, my voice shaking so badly I could barely get the words out. Someone is in my account, I stammered to the calm, detached voice on the other end. They're transferring everything. You have to stop it. While I was on the phone, frantically verifying my identity, giving them all the details, another alert came through. Your primary account password has been changed. I was locked out. The operator on the phone was saying something about freezing the accounts, about launching an investigation, but his words sounded like they were coming from a great distance. All I could hear was the roaring in my ears and the silent finality of the last notification. By the time I realized exactly what was happening, it was already over. It was too late. The money was gone. I didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of the bed in the cold, dark room. My phone clutched in my hand, staring at the wall until the first pale grey light of dawn crept through the window. The house was silent, but my mind was screaming. Every scenario, every possibility played on a loop. I replayed every interaction with Zephyr, every condescending joke, every slick smile. The pieces were all there. A horrifying mosaic that I had refused to see. When I finally heard the first sounds of movement from downstairs, the clink of a coffee mug, the low rumble of a voice, I stood up on stiff, unsteady legs. My body felt hollowed out, a fragile shell. I splashed cold water on my face in the bathroom and looked at my reflection. A pale, wilded stranger looked back at me. There were dark circles under my eyes and my skin was ashen. The person in the mirror looked broken. I walked downstairs. The great room smelled of bacon, coffee, and a profound soul-crushing betrayal. A few early risers were already in the kitchen, including Aunt Jane, who was frying eggs at the stove, and at the kitchen island, laughing over a shared newspaper, were Bella and Zephyr. They looked happy, rested, completely at ease. Bella's hand was resting on his arm, her expression soft and adoring. She was a loyal shadow, blissfully unaware or willfully ignorant of the darkness he cast. The sight of them, so normal and untroubled, sent a surge of cold fury through me. It was so potent, it made me study. The shaking stopped. My vision sharpened. I walked into the kitchen. My footsteps on the wooden floor sounded unnaturally loud in the quiet room. Everyone looked up. Aunt Jane smiled. "Good morning, sleepyhead. Want some eggs?" I ignored her. My eyes were locked on Zephyr. I held up my phone, the screen dark. My voice came out low and flat, devoid of any emotion. "Who touched my laptop last night?" The casual morning chatter died instantly. The only sound was the sizzle of the eggs in the pan. Aunt Jane froze spatula in midair. Bella's smile faltered. Eric, however, didn't flinch. He took a slow, deliberate sip of his coffee, his eyes glinting with amusement over the rim of the mug. He was enjoying this. "Why, Ruby?" he asked, his tone dripping with mock concern. "Lose your Pinterest password?" His joke, so dismissive and belittling, hung in the air. The rage inside me solidified into something hard and clear, like ice. "My bank account is empty," I said, my voice as cold and empty as the account itself. "Every cent. Last night, someone transferred all of my savings to a new untraceable account." Aunt Jane let out a small, sharp gasp. My uncle, who had just walked in, stopped in his tracks. The laughter was gone now, replaced by a thick, uncomfortable silence. Bella's face had drained of all its color. She looked from me to Eric, her eyes wide with a dawning horror that I couldn't tell was real or feigned. "What are you saying?" she whispered, her hand pulling away from Eric's arm as if it had been burned. "You're saying someone here stole from you?" "I'm saying someone used my device to do it," I said flatly, never taking my eyes off Zephyr. "My bank confirmed the login came from this house, from my laptop just after midnight." Bella looked at her husband, a question in her eyes. "Zephyr," and that's when he chuckled. It wasn't a laugh of humor. It was a dry, ugly, dismissive sound that seemed to suck all the warmth from the room. It was the sound of contempt. The sound of a man who believed he had gotten away with it. He pushed his coffee mug away and leaned back in his stool, crossing his arms over his chest. He looked directly at me, a smug, triumphant smirk spreading across his face. "Maybe the universe just wanted to balance things out," he said, his voice casual, as if he were commenting on the weather. "We had needs. You had money. Let's be honest, Ruby." He paused, letting his words sink in, letting everyone in the room feel their weight. We needed it more than you. The words echoed in the sudden, absolute silence of the kitchen. They were more than a confession. They were a justification, a verdict on my life. My hard work, my sacrifices, my quiet existence, it all meant nothing. My money was better off with them because they wanted more. Because their desires were more valid than my security. No one spoke. Not my aunt, not my uncle, not even Bella. They just stared, their faces a mixture of shock and disbelief. They had heard it, a confession in everything but name, and they did nothing. In their silence, they were complicit. In their inaction, they chose him. I didn't cry. I didn't scream or yell or demand justice. The part of me that would have done that, the part of me that still cared what they thought had died in that moment. A strange, chilling calm settled over me. I just held Derek's gaze for a long moment, letting him see the absolute emptiness he had created inside me. Then I turned around and walked out of the kitchen, my whole body trembling, not with fear or sadness, but with a new terrifying and resolute clarity. The family I thought I had was gone, and I was completely and utterly on my own. The drive away from the mountain lodge was silent and surreal. I didn't cry. The time for tears was over, burned away by the cold fury that had taken root in my chest. The beautiful scenery passed by my window. Majestic pines dusted with morning frost. Mountains sharp against a brilliant blue sky. But I saw none of it. My world had shrunk to the size of the betrayal. I was driving on pure adrenaline. My hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. The engine's low hum was the only sound, a steady counterpoint to the chaotic screaming in my mind. We needed it more than you. Derek's words were a brand seared into my memory. It wasn't just theft. It was a complete and utter invalidation of my life, my work, my very existence. He hadn't just stolen my money. He had stolen my belief in family, my sense of safety, and Bella. Bella had stood there. Her silence was a consent, a quiet signature on Zephyr's crime. I didn't drive back to Seattle. I drove to the nearest town of any significant size and found the local police station. It was a small, unassuming brick building with a faded flag flying out front. It felt inadequate somehow for the scale of the crime that had been committed against me. I walked in, my steps echoing in the quiet lobby. The air smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant. A bored-looking officer sat behind a thick pane of plexiglass, typing slowly with 2 fingers. He looked up, his expression neutral. "Can I help you?" "I need to file a report," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "A major theft." He directed me to a hard plastic chair in a small windowless room. I sat and waited, my body numb. A few minutes later, a different officer came in. He was older with tired eyes and a kind face. He introduced himself as Officer Miller. He sat down across from me with a notepad. "Okay, miss," he said gently. "Tell me what happened." And so I did. I laid out the whole story from the reunion to the laptop on the bed to the bank alerts that had drained my life savings in a matter of minutes. I spoke in a flat, even tone, recounting the facts as if I were describing something that had happened to someone else. It was the only way I could get through it without breaking down. Officer Miller listened patiently, his pen scratching across the notepad. When I told him the total amount stolen, nearly $120,000, his eyebrows shot up. "That's grand larceny. And then some," he murmured. He asked for the bank statements, the transaction logs, the screenshots of the alerts I'd taken on my phone. I had them already in a folder. I was methodical. My shock had been replaced by a grim laser-like focus. "Who had access to your laptop? Who was in the lodge with you?" he asked. I listed the names of my family members, my aunts, my uncles, my cousins. It felt like a betrayal in itself, listing their names in a police station. But the truth was the truth. "And do you have a primary suspect?" he asked, his eyes watching me carefully. I took a deep breath. Saying it out loud would make it irrevocably real. "Yes, my brother-in-law, Zephyr Mitchell." He didn't seem surprised. "Family," he sighed, shaking his head slightly. "Happens more than you think." He asked me if I had any proof beyond my suspicions. He is good as confessed, I told him. And I repeated Derek's chilling words. We needed it more than you. Officer Miller wrote it down, his expression hardening. A confession is good. Hard proof is better. The bank will conduct its own fraud investigation, and we'll work with them. We'll need to get a warrant to check the lodge's internet records, trace where the money was wired. It's a process. I spent over an hour at the station signing papers, giving my statement, and answering questions. They froze my accounts and officially opened a case. Officer Miller gave me his card and told me to contact my bank's cybercrime division immediately. He was professional, and for that, I was grateful. But as I walked out of the station and back into the blindingly bright sunshine, I felt a profound sense of despair. It was my word against Eric's. He would lie. He would charm and manipulate and twist the story until he was the victim. Bella would back him up. The rest of the family, wanting to avoid a messy conflict, would probably claim they heard nothing. It would be a long, ugly fight, and I wasn't sure I had the strength for it. I got back in my car and just sat there for a long time, the keys in my hand. I felt utterly alone. Then, a thought surfaced, a memory from months ago that cut through the fog of my despair. About 6 months prior, I'd had an issue with a difficult client. He was demanding and unhappy with the final designs, and he had refused to pay the last installment of his bill. One morning, I discovered he'd tried to hack into my system to steal the raw design files. My security software blocked him. But the attempt left me shaken. It was a violation. My work, my intellectual property was everything to me. That day, I had upgraded my entire security system. On the advice of a tech-savvy friend, I installed a comprehensive monitoring program on my work laptop. It was a high-end suite, the kind journalists and activists use. It included a hidden feature, a keystroke logger, and an activity monitor that would periodically and silently take a snapshot using the laptop's built-in camera, especially if incorrect passwords were used or new software was installed. The files were automatically encrypted and backed up to a separate secure cloud drive, completely independent of my main system. I had set it up and then in the rush of work, I had completely forgotten about it until now. My heart started to beat faster, a frantic rhythm of hope and fear. Could it be that simple? Could Derek have been that arrogant, that stupid? I didn't go home. I drove to my office, a small, quiet space I rented in a converted warehouse downtown. I unlocked the door. The familiar click of the lock, a comforting sound. Inside, I went straight to my desktop computer. My hands were trembling as I navigated to the secure cloud service. I entered my credentials, passed a 2-factor authentication, and my breath hitched when I saw it. There was a folder time-stamped from the night before. Inside were dozens of files. I clicked on the keystroke log first. It was a simple text file, a raw data stream of every key pressed on my laptop. I scrolled down to the time of the transfers. There it was in plain, undeniable text. A search for my bank's website. My username, a series of failed password attempts, and then a successful login. I recognized the password immediately. It was an old one I had used years ago, a combination of my mother's name and my childhood street address. Something Bella would have known. She must have given it to him. The thought was a fresh stab of pain, but I pushed it away. I had to keep going. The log showed him navigating the banking site, adding a new external account, and initiating the transfers one by one. It was all there, a perfect digital record of his crime. Then I opened the other folder, the one with the webcam snapshots. The files were labeled with timestamps. I clicked on the one marked 1:14 a.m. An image loaded onto my screen. It was grainy, lit only by the glow of the laptop screen, but it was perfectly clear. It was Zephyr. He was leaning forward, his face close to the camera, a look of intense concentration in his eyes. He was in my room at the lodge. I could see the distinctive pattern of the quilt on the bed behind him. He was caught. His face, his actions, his presence, all captured in a single damning photograph. I stared at the image, at the reflection of my banking website in his pupils. He looked so sure of himself, so entitled. He had no idea that the very tool he was using to destroy me was also the tool of his own undoing. I slowly, carefully began to download everything. I saved the logs, the screenshots of the transfers, and the crystal-clear image of Derek's face. I made multiple copies, uploading them to different secure drives and emailing them to my personal account. The numbness I had been feeling was gone, replaced by a cold, hard certainty. This was no longer my word against his. This was his face, his keystrokes, his crime. I had the proof. Solid, irrefutable, and undeniable. And I knew exactly what I was going to do with it. The game had changed. He thought he had all the power. He was about to find out how wrong he was. The next morning, I woke up. Before sunrise. For the first time in 2 days, I had slept. A deep and dreamless sleep born of exhaustion and a newfound sense of purpose. The fear and panic had been burned away, leaving behind a core of cold, resolute calm. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was a woman with a plan. I took a shower and got dressed, choosing my clothes with deliberate care. I put on a pair of dark trousers, a simple black blouse, and a structured blazer. It was my armor, the professional uniform I wore when I meant business. I didn't look like a woman who had lost everything. I looked like a woman in control. I printed out the evidence, the keystroke logs, the screenshots of the bank transfers with their neat, damning timestamps, and on a separate final page in full color, the picture of Derek's face, illuminated by the glow of my laptop screen. I placed them all in a crisp manila folder. It felt solid and heavy in my hands, the physical weight of his betrayal. Then I called Officer Miller. I told him I had acquired definitive proof and that I would be sending it to him immediately. I also told him what I was about to do. He advised against it, warning me that confronting a suspect could be unpredictable. I told him I understood, but that it was something I needed to do for myself. Just be aware, he said, his voice firm. Once you send me that file, I will have enough for a warrant. Things will move very quickly. I'm counting on it, I replied. I drove to Bella and Derek's house. It was a charming little suburban craftsman. The kind of house with a welcoming front porch and a perfectly manicured lawn. The kind of house I had helped them buy. Pulling up to the curb, I felt a bitter taste in my mouth. My money was in the foundation of that house, in the designer kitchen tiles, in the expensive landscaping. I had funded their picture-perfect life, and they had thanked me by gutting mine. I walked up the stone pathway and rang the doorbell. I didn't have to wait long. Bella opened the door, and her face fell when she saw me. She was still in her pajamas, a silky, expensive-looking set. Her eyes were puffy and she looked like she hadn't slept either. "Ruby," she breathed, her voice a nervous whisper. "What are you doing here?" She glanced behind me as if expecting to see police cars. "I need to talk to you both," I said, my voice even and calm. I walked past her into the house without waiting for an invitation. The house smelled of coffee and toast. It was a scene of perfect domesticity. Derek was sitting at the breakfast nook, scrolling through his phone and sipping from a mug. He was dressed in a golf shirt, already preparing for a day of leisure paid for with my life savings. He looked up when I entered, and a slow, arrogant smirk spread across his face. He thought I had come to plead, to beg, to cry. "Well, look what the cat dragged in," he said, not bothering to stand up. "Come to your senses. Ready to admit you misplaced your money?" I ignored him and walked to the table. Bella hovered by the doorway, wringing her hands, a picture of anxiety. She was a spectator in her own life. I placed the manila folder on the polished surface of their breakfast table. The quiet slap of the folder against the wood was the only sound. "I'm going to give you one last chance to tell me the truth," I said, my voice quiet, but carrying the weight of an ultimatum. It wasn't a question. It wasn't a plea for reconciliation. It was a final formal gesture before I brought their world crashing down. Derek let out a short, derisive laugh. He leaned back in his chair, the picture of smug confidence. "The truth. The truth is you're hysterical. You lost your money in a bad investment or got scammed online and now you're trying to blame us to save face. What? You think you've got some kind of evidence?" I didn't answer him. I simply opened the folder. I slid the first page across the table towards him. It was the screenshot of the first $40,000 transfer, then the second, then the third. His smirk began to falter, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. Bank records can be faked, he scoffed, but his voice lacked its earlier conviction. They can, I agreed calmly. But keystroke logs are harder. I pushed the next set of papers toward him. Page after page of his digital footprints, his searches, his failed password attempts, the new account information he had entered. He went pale. He stared at the pages, his bravado visibly crumbling. Bella crept closer, her eyes wide with horror as she peered over his shoulder. Zephyr, what is that? He slammed his hand on the table. It's fake. She's framing me. You believe this, Bella? You believe this garbage over me, he shouted, his voice rising in panic. I don't need her to believe it, I said, my voice cutting through his tirade. And then I played my final card. I reached into the folder and pulled out the last page, the photograph. I placed it in the center of the table, directly in his line of sight. His reflection stared up at him from the glossy paper. His face illuminated in the dark, his eyes fixed on the screen. It was undeniable. It was him. A strangled sound escaped Bella's throat. Her hand flew to her mouth and her eyes filled with tears. She stared at the picture, then at her husband, the man she had defended, the man she had chosen over me. The lie was broken. The truth was there in full color on her kitchen table. Zephyr, tell me that's not you, she whispered, her voice trembling. He froze completely. The mask was gone. The charm, the confidence, the arrogance, it all evaporated, leaving behind a weak, cornered man. He stood up so quickly his chair scraped loudly against the floor. Panic was rolling off him in waves. She's a psycho. She doctored it. You're not going to get away with this. He spat at me, his finger jabbing in my direction. The police forensic team might disagree, I said softly. I reached into my blazer pocket and pulled out Officer Miller's business card. I placed it on the table next to the photograph of his face. I sent them the full file this morning. They were very interested. They should be here in about 10 minutes. For the first time in his life, Zephyr Mitchell was speechless. The color drained from his face. His bravado, his lies, his entire carefully constructed world collapsed into a pile of ashes at his feet. He looked from the picture to the business card and then to me. The look in his eyes was no longer contempt. It was raw, primal fear. You wouldn't, he hissed, the words barely audible. I looked him straight in the eye. All the years of being dismissed, belittled, and used fueling the two words that sealed his fate. I already did. The 10 minutes that followed were the longest of my life. The air in the kitchen was thick and suffocating. A toxic soup of Derek's panicked silence and Bella's ragged, broken sobs. Derek paced back and forth like a caged animal, running his hands through his hair and muttering under his breath. He alternated between shooting me looks of pure hatred and glaring at Bella as if it were all her fault. Bella had collapsed onto a chair, her head in her hands, her whole body shaking. The perfect domestic scene was shattered, the pieces lying glinting and sharp on the floor. I didn't move. I stood by the kitchen island, a silent observer to the destruction I had set in motion. I felt strangely detached, as if I were watching a movie. There was no triumph, no satisfaction. There was only a vast, hollow emptiness where my love for my sister used to be. I was grieving the loss of a relationship that I was finally forced to admit had probably only ever existed in my own mind right on time. A quiet, official-looking sedan pulled up to the curb, followed by a marked police car. Their arrival was discreet without sirens or flashing lights, which somehow made it all the more chilling. 2 uniformed officers and a plain-clothed detective, who I recognized from his profile as Detective Allen, walked up the stone path. I opened the door before they could knock. Detective Allen nodded at me. "Miss Thompson?" His gaze flickered past me to the scene in the kitchen. "Is this Mr. Mitchell?" "It is," I said. The moment Derek saw the police, his panic morphed into a final, desperate burst of blustering rage. "You can't be serious," he yelled, pointing a shaking finger at me. "She set me up. This is a family dispute." You have no right to be here. The officers were unfazed. They moved with a calm, efficient, and unshakable professionalism that Derek's theatrics couldn't touch. Zephyr Mitchell, Detective Allen said, his voice level and firm. You're under arrest for grand larceny, identity theft, and wire fraud. One of the unformed officers stepped forward and began to read him his rights. As the cold, familiar words of the Miranda warning filled the sunny kitchen, Bella let out a wail of despair. No, you can't. He didn't mean it. Ruby, please stop them, she cried, turning to me, her face a mess of tears and desperation. He's my husband. You're ruining our lives. You're ruining our lives. The words struck me with their incredible delusional selfishness, as if their lives were the only ones that mattered, as if my life, the one they had shattered, was just collateral damage. I looked at my sister, at the woman I had protected and provided for my entire life, and I felt nothing. The well of my compassion had finally run dry. I didn't do this, Bella, I said, my voice devoid of heat or anger. He did. The officers handcuffed Zephyr. His arrogant smirk was long gone, replaced by a mask of slack-jawed disbelief. He looked pathetic and small. As they led him out of the house, he continued to shout, protesting his innocence, blaming me, blaming Bella, blaming everyone but himself. Bella tried to follow, sobbing his name, but an officer gently blocked her way. I watched through the front window as they put him in the back of the police car. The door shut with a solid final thud, and just like that, it was over. The car pulled away from the curb and a strange heavy silence descended on the house. A month later, the practicalities began to resolve themselves. With the irrefutable evidence I had provided, the bank's fraud department worked quickly. They managed to recover 90% of the stolen funds from the account Derek had set up. It turned out he wasn't a criminal mastermind. He was just an arrogant fool who thought he was too smart to get caught. He had transferred the money to a new account in his own name, planning to move it offshore later. My insurance policy, the one I paid for diligently every month, the practical one after all, covered the remaining 10%. Financially, I was made whole again. But the real fallout wasn't about the money. Zephyr, faced with an ironclad case, pleaded guilty to all charges in exchange for a reduced sentence. He was sentenced to several years in prison. The house I had helped them buy was sold to cover his legal fees. Bella and their son had to move into a small, cramped apartment. Their perfect life built on my money and his lies had imploded. One evening about 2 months after the arrest, my phone rang. It was Bella. I almost didn't answer, but some lingering vestigial sense of duty made me swipe to accept the call. Her voice was small, broken, a pale imitation of its former confident charm. "Ruby, I'm here," I said. There was a long pause filled with the sound of her shaky breathing. I wanted to say I'm sorry. She finally managed to get out. I didn't know he was going to go that far. I never thought he would take everything. Her words were meant to be an apology, a bridge across the chasm that had opened up between us. But all I heard was another excuse. I didn't know he'd go that far. It wasn't a denial of knowing about the crime, just a denial of knowing about the scale of it. She was sorry he got caught. She was sorry the consequences were so severe. "You knew," I said, my voice soft but unyielding. "You knew he was using me. You've always known. You stood by and watched him belittle me, take from me, and treat me like my only purpose was to fund your lifestyle. You knew what he was doing, Bella. Maybe you didn't know the exact amount, but you knew the intent. You just didn't care. You didn't care until he got caught and it blew up in your face." Silence. A deep echoing silence on the other end of the line. There was nothing left for her to say. I had spoken the truth. A truth that had been sitting between us, unspoken, for more than a decade. She had made her choice over and over again, long before Derek ever touched my laptop. I didn't wait for her to respond. I didn't need to hear any more excuses or justifications. I was done. And then I hung up. Severing the final tie with my sister should have felt catastrophic. For my entire life, she had been the only family I had, the central pillar around which I had built my sense of duty and identity. But as I ended the call, I didn't feel a sense of loss. I felt a sense of release. It was the quiet, profound peace that comes from finally putting down a weight you didn't realize you were carrying. The weight of unreciprocated love, of endless obligation, of hope that was never going to be fulfilled. In the weeks and months that followed, my life began to reform. Not into its old shape, but into something new, something stronger. The story of what happened rippled through my professional community. At first, I was mortified, worried that the messy personal drama would damage my studio's reputation. But the opposite happened. Old clients called not just to offer their sympathy, but to offer new projects. A client for whom I'd done a small job years ago hired me for a massive corporate rebranding, telling me, anyone with that kind of integrity and backbone is someone I want on my team. My business didn't just survive, it thrived. The story hadn't defined me as a victim, it had defined me as a survivor. My true family began to reveal themselves, and they had nothing to do with blood ties. My friend Anna, who owned the coffee shop next to my office, showed up at my door the day after the arrest with a week's worth of groceries and a bottle of expensive scotch. "You're not going through this alone," she had said, pushing past me to stock my fridge. My small team at the studio rallied around me, working extra hours to make sure we hit all our deadlines while I was dealing with the police and the bank, never once complaining. These were the people who mattered, the ones who showed up, not with their hands out, but with their hearts open. They didn't need blood ties to stand by me. They just needed to be decent human beings. With the insurance money and a new lucrative contract, I made a decision. I left my old apartment, the one filled with memories of late-night phone calls from Bella asking for money. I found a new place, a bright, airy loft apartment in a converted warehouse overlooking the city skyline. It had huge windows, high ceilings, and a small balcony where I could watch the sunset. It was more than I needed, but it was exactly what I wanted. It was a space that was entirely unapologetically mine, paid for by my own hard work, untainted by the ghosts of my past. The first morning in my new home, I made myself a cup of coffee and stood on the balcony, watching the city wake up below. The air was crisp and cool. For the first time in as long as I could remember, I felt a sense of profound peace. I was alone, but I was not lonely. I was secure in the knowledge that I could rely on myself. I had faced the worst betrayal imaginable, and I had not only survived, but I had come out stronger. I remembered the thought that had crossed my mind in the moments before I drove to Bella's house for the final confrontation. I had looked at the folder of evidence and had made a promise to myself. I had promised that I would see this through to the end, no matter how ugly it got. A quiet, fierce voice in my head had whispered, "They won't mind what's coming next, so you can't either." Standing on that balcony, I realized it was more than just a thought. It was a mantra, a reminder that my own peace, my own security was worth fighting for, that I had a right to protect what I had built. My life found a new rhythm. I poured my energy into my work, finding joy and purpose in my creativity. I reconnected with old friends, went on hikes, took a pottery class. I started to build a life that was rich and full, a life that wasn't defined by my obligations to others, but by my own passions and choices. Every morning, I start my day with a cup of coffee on my balcony. As I open my laptop to start my workday, I sometimes remember that night at the lodge, the cold dread, the feeling of violation. I remember how easily love can be twisted into leverage, how the word family can be weaponized. But then I look out at the sprawling city, at the endless possibilities of the day ahead, and I remember what I learned. I learned that you can build a new family out of loyalty and respect. I learned that strength isn't about never falling. It's about how you get back up. And I learned that the ultimate act of self-love is protecting what you have built against those who believe they are entitled to it. The memory of the betrayal doesn't hurt anymore. It's just a scar, a reminder of a battle I fought and won. Because karma, I've learned, doesn't always need to be a grand cosmic force. Sometimes it's just a woman with a keystroke logger and the courage to burn it all down to build something better in its place. And she's got perfect aim. If you've listened this far, thank you. My story is proof that the deepest betrayals often come from the people who are supposed to love us the most. If someone has ever weaponized the word family to steal your peace, your time, or your money, listen to me. You are not heartless for walking away. You are not selfish for building a boundary. You are not wrong for choosing yourself. You are wise. Drop a comment below if you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted. I want you to know you are not alone. Hit like and subscribe for more stories like this. And always remember, protect what you build.